When our children are born, we're apprehensive that they're going to be okay. We worry about their growth and development, and we marvel at the miracles of nature to create these amazing beings into the world. For many, we carry on exploring the stages of growth our children hit, and we celebrate their achievements and ours along the way. This journey is not always an easy one, nor does it come with a manual, and if you're a parent, you're probably nodding your head right now in agreement. Today's special guest, Kay Reeve, comes to us from the UK and is a mother of 2 and a grandmother of 3. Her journey with her youngest has created a journey of challenge, worry, resiliency, and discovery. And the author of a new book, Brain Unchained, she's created a teen self-help book, young adult personal development book, and parenting teens book, all in one. We were introduced to each other just a few weeks ago as part of a development for the Choose Love movement, which supports social and emotional learning skills for youth and adults. Kay's approach of creating a visual context for emotions lends beautifully to this program. And when I met her, I was instantly encapsulated by her amazing ability to create something that leading experts were unable to articulate. I look forward to sharing Kay's brilliance with you. You're listening to Be Well with Michelle Greenwell. This is Season 1, Episode 10, Emotional Awareness Tools for Teens and Parents with Kay Reeve. Hi, Kay.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Oh, it's been a delight to be chatting with you, and I'll take every opportunity to dive into these beautiful topics.
Oh, thank you. And what a beautiful introduction as well. That's really lovely. Really lovely.
What really got me was I started reading your book. It arrived last week and dove into the book, and I was like, you really did bring all 3 of those books into one, and the way that you've articulated the voices of those different components, it's brilliant. Yeah, I love it. And it makes it so easy for parents to go into their little toolbox and have the pieces right there. Because I read it, but then I think, oh, what would a parent? And when I drive myself over to the next part. So, okay, before we dive into there, I just wanted to see about what kind of tea you might have prepared today. What's your favorite?
Okay. Well, I'm not favorite. I'm one of these people. I like change, and you'll learn more about that through the next sort of few minutes as we go along. But I love change. But today, my favorite at the moment is licorice and peppermint, which I bought. And as you know, it's very fresh. It's still hot and steaming. Look at this. I can see it. If I hold it against the black, you might see it steaming. But it's licorice and peppermint at the moment because I've been having a few digestive issues, and I just find it really soothing.
Nice.
Helps calm me. So
beautiful. And is that the typical kind of mug that you would grab? It's a clear glass one, so I'm just
for a herbal tea I like to be able to see it, but it's a bit cloudy today. I think it's because I was in a hurry and I didn't filter the water. I just threw it straight in the kettle. It's a bit cloudy, but I do like my herbal tea in a clear mug.
Okay.
And keep my regular mug for a cup of coffee or barley cup. I tend not to drink coffee. I drink barley cup, but
there's something about looking at the tea, the colors that come through, and has its own soothing piece that goes with it, I think. Yeah.
I did have a slightly better shaped mug, but I recently broke it by accident, so I've got it in what's traditionally an Irish whiskey jug. It's meant to be like your coffee and then your cream on top, but it works just as well for herbal teas. It's
beautiful.
We can embrace change and adapt as well. So.
Because we were with the Choose Love movement in our discussion and how we met, I have been playing around with a lemonade for the I Choose Love tea, which we made as a fundraiser for Choose Love. And so this tea, it's same thing. It's in a clear glass because it's a lemonade today. But the color that comes through this is just so beautiful. So for those that are listening, it's like a light pink with the hints of yellow in it. And it's just a delight to drink. So I've been loving to play with this tea.
That sounds interesting because, when I think of lemonade, I think of clear or pale yellow. Wouldn't have expected red. So it's got other flavours as well in there, or just lemony?
It's got all the I Choose Love flavours. So there's rose hip and hyacinth, and then there's a red bush rooibos is the base on it.
Oh, red bush, love red bush as well. That's another tea I like, but I don't categorize it under herbal teas, but it is tea that I do love drinking. Yeah. So,
Wow.
oh, that sounds amazing. Thank you.
All right, so let's begin, because I know you and I can just talk. So let's dive into some of these ideas and go back to the beginning. So if you want to tell me a little bit about life for you and your two kids, and when you discovered the challenges that your son was facing, take us back to there.
Yeah, well, the discovery of it is interesting because things I'd recognized were a little bit different in my son quite early on. But it wasn't until he was about 7 years old. We'd already been having challenges with him through play school, nursery, first years in primary school, etc. And I got to a point where another parent, when he was 7 years old, she said, I hope you don't mind me saying, she said, but Matthew reminds me of my son, she said. And I knew her son had been diagnosed with something and I didn't know what it was. And that he had challenges and they were a little bit more obvious in a way. And she said, well, it's Asperger's. I said, I've never heard of it. What is it? So she said, well, it's autistic spectrum disorder. So she came back the next day with a wallet for me full of paperwork that she'd researched, and she said, have a look through it. And even though, I knew something was different and we'd been looking at ADHD and dyspraxia, dyslexia, things like this, but I'd never heard of Asperger's. And when I read through this paperwork, it was like, wow, yes, that is what my son is being challenged with, with the social aspect and being able to be around too many people at once in school. And it just encapsulated who he was as a person. And it was like I was reading about him. So we then went to the doctors because we'd been struggling to get a diagnosis of anything through school. And the support was lacking a bit at that time. It wasn't quite as good sort of 20 years ago. And so we went through the doctors sort of privately and got him through to a psychologist, and she said, yes, it's definitely Asperger's. But it was when I heard about it, I said to my mum, I said, do you remember me saying it's almost as if he's autistic? And she said, yes, I remember very clearly. And it was when he was 10 weeks old. So for me, I know, and that's what shook me when I heard about it being almost, I knew about autism. In terms of it, like the film Rain Man years ago, and you see the movies with people with full-on autism and savant, and I'd when I was younger, my own father had worked in a day centre where he worked with people with autism and Down syndrome and other challenges, where they were living a life that was fully supported, even if they lived at home and went to a regular day centre, and he was helping them almost. What to them was like having a job, helping with crafts and garden work and bits, and it was like having a day job. So my father used to help these people with making like concrete garden ornaments, and they'd sell them off to raise funds back. So it was almost like a day work centre. So I was used to going visiting. So I'd grown up not being afraid of all these things and meeting people like this. But it was the way I then said to my mum, it's almost as if he's autistic when he was 10 weeks old. I just did not know how close I was. And then carried on all those years, just not associating that with the autistic spectrum in the literal sense, because I just didn't know about Asperger's and the sort of whole spectrum. So, so we got the diagnosis, but it was around the same year that he started to feel very suicidal in school. And it was when he was 8 years old. So just after he got the diagnosis, he was 8 years old. And he came out of school one night and actually tried to run under a car, and literally just caught the hood of his coat and stopped him. And I honestly thought, initially when your child runs towards a car and a car screeches to a halt, you just think it's them not paying attention. But he turned to me and screamed at me in front of everybody, why did you stop me? Why didn't you let me die? I don't want to live anymore. And he was really screaming at me. And he just kept screaming at me the whole way home. And I felt so sick. And I was just like, what do I do with him? And, there's lots of support out there for adults and teenagers who are suicidal. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't think to call the doctors at the time. And I spoke to the school teacher the next day, who just said, oh, kids say funny things, and completely dismissed it. And it just that was where the real challenges began for us, because then he was just suicidal every single day for the next year, until by the time he was 9, we took him out of school. I home educated him from there, and we had some better years, and then the teenage depression hit, and he went really downhill until he was about 19. I then had this classic zombie-like teenager who I couldn't connect with. He couldn't tell me what day of the week it was. He was just shut off from the world. He was angry at everything for everything that was nothing, and just it was just your classic full-on depression, reaching the stage of psychosis, plus all the Asperger's. He was trying to deny that he had it and trying to prove that he didn't have it. And the more he tried to fight it, the more obvious it was, but he couldn't see that. And that was really where this challenge sort of led me to, was this point of everything had failed, all the help, the diet changes, the therapists, the home education we'd tried, done with him. And we'd even got him into a hostel by this point where he was 24/7 staff, because I'd had to go back to work by then. And we just had this point, we just got this point where I didn't know what else to do, and I was scared every single day. Literally, as a mum, I was going through stress and anxiety every single day. I might get a phone call from the police to say he's done something really bad, or am I going to get a phone call to say he's taken his own life? Or, I just didn't know what to expect every single day, and I was terrified for him. And so that's where my struggles brought me right through to the beginning of this journey with the book, was in a last-ditch attempt to sit down and start talking to him about his emotions in terms of colour. And I realised that, he's on the autistic spectrum, and he doesn't understand emotions. But how can you teach something that's not visible? He needed to see something to learn it. And that was where, over the following year, I gradually developed this concept of talking to him in colours to what became the book. So that's this one, Brain Unchained. And from, as shown on here, patterns of colour, the diagram became the diagram of the emotional cycle. So I had a visual way to say to him, this is your emotions, where we're going to start learning from. So this is not everything you'll learn in your life sort of thing, but it was a good starting point. So we got, I got it right way, happy, sad, angry, and depressed is where I began with him. And then I started to talk to him about the only reason he'll change between emotions is because something changed, either something internally or something in the world around him. And from there, the change in him became so rapid when we started to talk about this. I realised I needed to do something with it. So it just started as a last-ditch attempt. I'd been 20 seconds away from calling the local hospital to admit him for psychiatric help. We literally had the phone in my hand, and then we just, the inspiration came at that last minute to just have that one last cup of coffee with him, go and have a chat. And it just sort of all came out of that desperation. They said, necessity is the mother of all invention, and I was a mother who needed something desperately, and it just kind of all came from there. So so not very short description of it, but it was, oh my goodness, quite a journey from 10 weeks old through till he was 19, until it was like what had been in my head all along, suddenly it all clicked and started to come out. And I was like, oh yeah, we all have this power in us to understand this, because that's the human emotional cycle. No matter who we are, what age we are, what race we are, whatever our circumstances are, every human being on the earth has the same emotional cycle. And I realised that nobody's ever drawn a picture of it. There are lots of personality things where people have associated colours, and they're very close to this, and the colours are actually pretty good, they're spot on. But nobody ever actually said, what is the emotional cycle? We call it a cycle, so it must be round. And yet everything online, when you look up the emotional cycle, it's all this sort of sine wave of processes, is the usual representation, not something that's usually aimed more at the therapist to understand, to support a client, rather than aimed at a young person or a parent trying to understand it for everyday conversation.
And then you've got the hierarchy pieces. And then I'm thinking about the charts I have in the 5-element wheel, where you have, as you say in your book, there are hundreds and hundreds of emotions, and you can have them all listed but what do you do with that? That doesn't help someone navigate them.
Yes.
Yeah. And then bringing your piece of, is the change on the inside or is the change on the outside is brilliant, because how do I react to the change that's on the outside? What does that mean to me?
Yeah, and that's quite powerful, because a few years back I did a university talk with some students, and we were talking about positive thinking. That was the subject for the day, positive thinking. So it was really powerful. I've got a little cutout version here. Really powerful to say, well, if you're not thinking positively, you will be thinking negatively. That's sort of your two options. So it was really good to have this visual of why positive thinking is so important, because all the time you're alive, you will be somewhere in one of these four emotional states. And as you say, thousands of words. According to Tony Robbins, there are over 6,000 words in the English dictionary to describe emotions. But how many teenagers and even parents are going to know all 6,000 words? But you know how you feel, no matter what you call it. You can take all the words away and you still have a feeling. And that's the bit was important to me, was to help him to understand that feeling in terms of, does he feel positive or negative? Is he angry or sad? Is it high or low? And we all the vocabulary that we use, no matter who it is in the world, whatever vocabulary they use, whatever language they use, those feelings are still the same, whether it's a high emotion or a low emotion. Hence the yellows at the top and the black at the bottom, and sad and angry are always the opposition. And again, oh my goodness, I watched hundreds of hours of videos, including Tony Robbins and loads of other people, to sort of say, well, once I designed this emotional cycle as well, I wanted to do something with it, but there's not much point doing something with it if I can break it. So I watched hundreds of hours of programs and videos and read papers, listened to music, watched people around me. And I spent a couple of years just studying everything in sort of my little world around me and everything I could see and hear. I think, can anything break this? And actually it just kept reinforcing it. And everything we talk about, people already talk about. So I've not designed something new. I've just recognized what's already there, but found a way to put it in the diagram.
And so for your son to get that first realization about what an emotion even was, can you kind of enlighten us a little bit about that?
It started off, I just wrote the four colours down for him on a bit of paper and put a box around them, and we just talked about each one and said, so when you feel like this, what words does he use? How does he describe that feeling or that emotion? And how does that manifest in him? What does he recognise in his own body sensations and things? And just bring an awareness in, just like, what does happiness mean to him? What would he call it? How would he feel? What would he do in those moments when he's happy? Who is he likely to be around? What's he going to be doing? And he just like bringing that whole little world of happiness into a conversation. And then we repeated the same with the sad, the angry, and the depressed. And then it was just getting him that awareness. First of all, just paying attention and opening his mind up, rather than just blindly fumbling through it all, just opening his mind to actually, as he's going through emotions, paying attention to them. And then we went on to the conversation of, okay, so something happened today. You were happy this morning, for example. You woke up, you were doing something, you were happy. But now you're ringing me because you're angry, or now we're talking, you're angry about something. What changed? So we went through this whole concept of what changed between emotions and what he could do to change things back. So it was looking at, first of all, what changed in him, or what changed what somebody else has done, or something's happened. Some of it might have been himself, like he's angry that he got docked some more pay from the job centre because he'd overslept and he was late for his appointment. So he was angry at them for docking his pay, but really he was angry at himself for oversleeping and things like this, as the teenagers do, going through that bit. So it was just going through his conversations and then talking about how he can make changes for the better next time round, what he can do to empower change next time he comes up against that same situation. And it just made such a difference so quickly for him to realise that he had more power to change than he'd thought, because it's in that state they really think the whole world's on their back, like they're just facing this brick wall. Nobody wants to help them. There's no hope of light, and all people are doing is saying, oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel and you can get yourself through it. And it's so easy as adults to like throw that at them. But if they knew how to get themselves through it, they would do. And nobody gives them the map of the tunnel. Nobody says to them, oh, here's what to do when you come across all the challenges. We just kind of tell them they've got to grow up and get on with it. And it's so easy to just throw all these sticky plaster quotes at them. It's like saying to somebody with a broken leg, oh, here's a sticky plaster, that'd be better tomorrow. And it doesn't work. And it's the same with emotions. When the emotions are broken, they need more than a sticky plaster. They need a full-on plaster cast. They need support. So like a broken leg, they need support. And they need support for longer, because it's like a mental injury when they're going through this. So, and I like to equate things to real life because it helps them as well. So that was what I did. And I just started saying to him, right, he'd got in that bad a state. I said, I'm a cruel mum. I'm cruel to be kind kind of mum. And I said, right, you can call it nagging. I said, you call it caring. I said, you call it what you like. I said, but I'm phoning you every single day until you sort your life out. And he went, okay, mum. And he accepted that phone call every single day. And I stuck with it until he had sorted his life out to a point where I felt like I could breathe. And that was the difference I noticed, that when things improved for him, I then felt less stressed as well. And it was like, yes, I could give him a break today and I'll call him tomorrow. So I'll start phoning every other day. And then when things weren't so good, I'd ring him every day again. And it really helped. So it was just having that extra support there for him, but having these conversations with him about the colours and the change were really, really powerful. But then there was a lot more came out of it, sort of an extra year or two down the line, as my brain started to kick in more, because it was like people are saying to me, yeah, this doesn't make sense though, having a strategy like this where you've got the 4 emotions, but we don't get about the change. It wasn't enough. And then I realized there's another level to this model. So if you've got the book, there's 3 main chapters. So the first main chapter is all about understanding that diagram, the dynamics, the positive, negative, the inner and outer, and there's lots more to it. And there's this like depth of emotions as well, as we talk about all of the depth of emotions. So for example, when you're talking about the blue isn't just sad, although initially I start by saying sad, but we're talking about anything from like just being thoughtful and calm right through to sad, through to the depths of grief. But they're all things that we talk about. Thoughts are air and emotions are water. And when you think about air sitting over water, and the deeper you go into water, it's like drowning in your own emotions. And thoughts are lighter. So it's just adding in all these dynamics. And I teach that through the book, through all of the emotions. And then the purpose of them as well. It's like over time, we have a purpose. We're all living with exactly the same emotional cycle that our ancestors would have had. Like even 10, 20,000 years ago, 30, even million years ago, human beings have always had the same emotional cycle. But our world is so different today to what it was then, but we're still trying to use the same exact set of emotions in today's world. So it's about understanding that purpose of it. If we were in cave days, what would a caveman have needed this emotion for? And how does that affect how we live in today's world? And that's really powerful as well. Like hangry is a really popular word that's come out in recent years. When somebody's angry because they're hungry. But what would be the purpose for it for a caveman? And it's just like understanding that, well, if he wasn't angry when he was hungry, he wouldn't go out hunting. He'd just sit there and go, yeah, I'm hungry. So what? And sit there and starve, But if he had to go out hunting for his food, he'd need to be angry to go out and fight.
Yeah.
But then there's also that purpose of once he's caught his catch, like happy, celebrating. But then there's the thoughtfulness. If he was still angry and carry on fighting for no purpose, he's got his food, but he don't need to fight once he's got the food, but he needs to be thoughtful and have caring connections with his family. So he takes it back to the cave. And, there's all these processes that go on in, like it's there for a reason for all animals, not just humans. So, lots to cover. And then it was realizing that actually, when we talk about change between those emotions, there's only 5 changes in the whole wide world that we can face. And
Wow.
that's the second chapter in the book was really powerful when I started to realize, okay, so we talked about changes, but once you break that down and realize there's only 5 starting points, so we've and that's broken down into another acronym. But it was realizing we've got these 5 changes, was like then saying, okay, so we've changed between emotions because something changed, but then it gives us this whole new conversation. And as a parent, realizing that meant that when I asked him questions, I could ask him questions from that point of view of breaking that down into those 5 points to identify where his challenges were and then help mentor him through. And the same now with grandchildren as well. You know, when my grandchildren are upset, I can ask them questions in a way that, you know, it's like once you realize, okay, this bit's okay, that bit's okay, and then they're answering questions, you're like, okay, I can identify which of the challenges they're going through. And then I can have a talk with the parents or something, and, you know, and they're like, oh yeah, and they're still learning it themselves, my children, but they're slowly getting to grips with it. But it's I think they're less inclined to follow all of it through because it's mum that's written the book, but it's but they do trust me enough to ring me when they do get stuck with it, which is great. But it's just giving me that ability to ask the right questions in the right way. So that when you said I've written it from different aspects, from the teenager, self-help and parenting. And it's like, yeah, because my son's a teenager who was going through this difficulty. So it was about depression. It is a self-help book in terms of it's got all the
beautiful exercises.
Exercises throughout it, all the way through. But then there's little parent toolbox tips at the end of every section, because that's how it was for us as a family. He needed support, so he needed that mentoring. He had to learn for himself, so he needed that self-help. But, you know, I needed the tools to help him as well, to mentor him. And like you said, they don't come with a manual. I had to write my own manual. But I've written the manual so I can share it now.
You touched on something very interesting, because as a new grandmother myself, and trying to assist, right, when asked or not asked for assistance, to be looking at this book from the perspective of how do I speak with my grandchildren, and now how can I share with my grandchildren how to understand their emotions? Because of course you have those terrible 2s. And then you have kind of when they get to 5, you know, 4 is like nice and easy and they're all happy and they enjoy everything they're doing. But then at 5, they decide they want to dive in with more questions. And, you know, that's when challenges come in there. And to have these tools as a grandparent and look at it is really interesting. Yeah. And there's no manual for grandparents, really, you know?
No, but it's all the same emotional cycle, just different levels of awareness. And that is another book I want to do further down the line, is aimed at adapting this to younger children and parenting. So I've got another version in my head, just got to get it out onto paper yet. But yeah, again, just this is for teenagers and young adults, and a lot of parents are still learning this for themselves. So to still learn this, it's always going to help, because the more you learn about your own emotions and your own awareness, the more you can support them, because understanding your own emotions builds empathy. And you can't understand somebody else's emotions if you don't understand your own. It's like trying to understand and teach somebody else how to drive a car. If you've never learned to drive a car, you know, you have to learn first. So it's really powerful, even for any adult, to read this, to be honest. Even though originally I've done this aimed at that teenager parent conversation, because that was our story and it was based around the struggle we'd had. Although this is not about reading a book about depression per se, it is a book about emotional awareness. But it was really important for me to look at it on the point of a lot of teenagers' problems and children's problems come not from their own experiences of what they're doing, but how the parents around them and the adults around them react. And it's like children, it's very easy to be constantly telling a child, don't do this, don't do that, keep out of trouble, you got to be good for your parents, you know, when they're little children. Like, I've just had my granddaughter for the weekend, so I've had a couple of days practice this week. And it's very easy to say, don't do this, don't do that. Can't put that down, don't touch that, that's not easy. And it's very easy to get in that bubble, and then when they're being good, ignore them, and then they build up their emotional responses based on the way adults respond to their to them. So again, it's just about, when you understand a bit more about what each of the emotions do and the purpose and what your own emotions as an adult are, it's about saying, actually, sometimes, you need to focus more on rewarding them when they're happy, not draw massive attention to when they're sad or angry, but just gently support them through it rather than telling them off. And it's like when children are sad, how many parents tell them, stop crying, and actually tell them off for being sad rather than supporting them through back to being happy. And when children are angry, it's like, again, just punishing them for being angry rather than finding out why they're being angry. So it's supporting them through that journey and helping them to understand from an early age that they still have choices. Even my granddaughter at 3.5, she goes through all the emotions like any of them. But it was just about recognizing if she's in those emotions, talk about it. Oh, bless her, 3.5 years old, and she sat at the dinner table yesterday and she went, oh, my life's broken and sad. I was like, this is 3-year-old. Why is your life broken and sad? She said, my heart hurts. I was like, well, who's hurt your heart? Oh, bless her. She's like, I'm like, I did not expect that from a 3-year-old. Just, I miss Kevin. I said, who's Kevin? Is he at nursery? No, at home. I was like, at home. And it took a little while for me to click. It's their next door neighbour. So when I spoke to my son to say she's coming home, and I said about it, she said her heart's broken because Kevin. He went, oh. And even my son twigged. He said, oh, because we're always telling her off, not do this, not do that. He said, but she goes outside on her bike, and Kevin talks to her and plays to her on her own level. He's their neighbour. And he said, because he doesn't tell her off. He said, I think she's missed playing outside with him this weekend. But it's the way she said it, bless her. Where did she get that from? My life's broken and sad, she says. But I just had to sit and listen to her, and but even when they're that age, and you think they might be talking a load of nonsense, they're just kids, but it's not. These are real, genuine feelings that were going on in her. That's something she missed. But she didn't know how else to tell me.
Exactly.
Oh, bless her little heart.
And our heads are thinking they should just be happy because they're at grandma's house.
Yeah.
Right? And time with grandma. But time with grandma means also time away from friends. And,
Yeah, and it sounds strange that, because they've got such tiny little gardens where they live, and they're like, it's like one big garden with imaginary fences in between, so they're just all like shared garden, but they've each got a bit of it, so they're almost like sharing the same garden even though they're individual, like very close community. And so to her it was just for a moment, because I don't have a garden and I don't have outside space, so for her, for a moment, I suppose in her mind she was like, oh, I'd like to be outside playing, and
then off she goes.
But there's so like I said, it's very easy when my son said, he wanted to die, a teacher just goes, oh no, your kids say funny things. Kids don't say funny things. I mean, yes, they do say things that are funny at times, that's different. But when adults are saying, oh, kids say funny things, that's an adult saying, I don't understand and I'm not going to try and work it out.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know how to cope with it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And as you're saying all that, I'm thinking for the listeners, because I'm thinking about different situations that have popped up. I also am thinking about different adults that I work with and that I interact with. And when people aren't thinking the same way that we're thinking, it's a dismissive thing that we do. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking of all these ways that I could be a better listener. I could understand better, and to take the time to actually look at your chart and look at those emotions, and then stop and say, okay, where do I think this person might be? And what is it going to take for me to assist them to find the way to the next space? Yeah. It's a really interesting process having your visual. And I know for those people who are listening on the podcast, they haven't, you held up the disc so we could see it. But to know,
keep forgetting it's audio.
Well, and they'll be able to go to your website and take a peek. But to really have that visual of the disc and the way that the colors lay out, and it's just so easy to put into your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a nice thing. It's just having that emotional map. And it's like in real life, as I like to think of it, like my son was emotionally very lost at 19. And I know what it's like to feel emotionally lost myself. You know, we've all been through challenges in life. But it's like when you are heading in the wrong direction on a real journey, like you go out for a walk and you're going the wrong way. If you haven't realised you're going the wrong way, how far are you going to keep walking until somebody says, by the way, you know you're going the wrong way? And would you rather somebody was able to catch it sooner? And then when you do realise you've gone the wrong way, you're like, oh, you've got a long way to go back if you've gone too far. And it's the same emotionally. The further you go in the wrong direction, the harder it can be to get back. And sometimes you need a bit of guidance. You need to stop and ask directions. You need to get help. Sometimes you might need a lift, or phone a taxi or phone a friend. And it's the same emotionally. Sometimes we just need that bit of support, and we need to phone a friend, and we need perhaps ring a professional person, psychiatrist, psychologist, counsellor, journey healer, whatever it is, dance to does emotional dance, whatever it is that we do. Sometimes it's very difficult emotionally to acknowledge we need that support, and it's difficult to identify when we're lost or how far we're lost. And people talk about light at the end of the tunnel, and so, like you're saying for the podcast, when we're talking about the cycle, it is like a wheel. So the diagram is just literally a wheel with, if you imagine drawing an X through it, with a yellow quadrant at the top and a black one at the bottom, and then red and blue are on the left and right. But the black is at the bottom because depression is deep, it's dark, it's low, and that's the black. And we talk about being at rock bottom, in a pit, stuck in depression. That's the bit in the black at the bottom. And we talk about happiness being a higher emotion. We feel on top of the world, and the sun's shining, and all the yellow bits are at the top. And it's how we already talk, it's how we feel. And our physical body language mirrors this as well. When we're happy, we put our arms up, we look up, we say chin up. But, when somebody's depressed, their head hangs low, their arms hang down, they look down. And that's why the diagram to me is so powerful, because it's not just about the language, it's about also how we physically react, how our energy feels. It all matches what's in this diagram. And so when we're talking about light at the end of the tunnel, and somebody's in that rock bottom moment, stuck at the bottom in that darkness, and that light at the end of the tunnel is actually the yellow in the top quadrant. The tunnels are red and blue. That's working through whatever it is that's holding you back, making you sad, making you angry. But the challenges in those tunnels are the bits that are changes. So it's looking at what's changed in you, or what needs to change in yourself, what's changed in the outside world or needs to change. So this is about working through those tunnels. And this is where the strategy here gives people the map of that tunnel. So we'd say light at the end of the tunnel. There is. But rather than, I love the analogy of this, in that people say light at the end of the tunnel, but that's it. That's a sticky quote. A sticky plaster quote.
Yeah.
But to actually give somebody this visual diagram and say, look, here's where you are, there's where you want to be, here's the map of how to get there. So then there's all the root causes. There's a third section in the book, which is the root causes, because every change has a root cause. And again, there's 5 root causes. So it's about recognizing what's changed and how those root causes can actually be turned into keys to success. So when you come across a challenge or a barrier, you actually find the keys to getting through those barriers. And it is just so empowering to be able to turn what seems like this massive hypothetical emotional world into something more strategic, and just break life down. And and I'd say just from all ages it works the same, but recognize it. In fact, my youngest test subject, bless him, was my grandson. He's now 6 next week. But when he was just 5 weeks old, like you're saying, as a grandparent, it's like, what do you do? And he'd cried and he grizzled and moaned all day one day, and my daughter did not know what to do. So I went to visit, as good grandma does, just get in the car, go up there and pay him a visit. And he was just literally low level, whingy, moaning, crying constantly, and she didn't know what to do. So we went through what I then just created, which was the second strategy in the book about change. And we looked at each of the 5 changes to say what's changed for him as a baby. And we broke this down. So it's called HELPS, HELPS, and that's health, emotional, logical, physical, and social. So we looked at each of them and said, what can each of them mean for him as a baby? And we eliminated everything that she'd done or could possibly do to make him comfortable as a baby. And the only one we couldn't answer or eliminate was logical. So obviously emotional was the one we needed to resolve as he was crying. But out of the other 4, we were like, health is fine, physically is fine, socially he'd got mum, he'd had hugs and everything. Everything was done, but there was something illogical that we couldn't answer. So I said, well, the only thing I can think of is maybe he's bored. He hasn't got something to do logically. So she said, but he's 5 weeks old. How can he be bored? Now, I'm not one for stopping with, I'm very philosophical in my head. I'd love to have studied philosophy properly. So I said, well, who decides when a baby starts to become bored? That was my next question. And I always question more, who decides when a baby begins to become bored? And she's, okay, I don't know. But anyway, so her partner rushed off and got a couple of toys and he clipped them on the hood of the pram and he just stopped crying instantly. And for the next 2 hours, his head just went left to right and left to right and left to right. And he just kept looking at these 2 toys. Not another whinge out of him. He was a really happy baby from there, bless him. And that's all it was. At 5 weeks old, he was bored.
Isn't that interesting? And you've done, you're doing all the things to make sure they're safe and comfortable.
Yep. And she'd done everything perfectly, but she just missed that one last thing. And having that strategy, there's just those 5 words to work through and just work our way through them and work out everything she could have done and what was missing. Good old Columbo, that kind of thing. The one thing you've missed is the one thing that's might not seem obvious, but it's very often the one thing that needs to be looked at. And it was just as simple as that. 5 weeks old, he was bored. Bless him.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you create in your writing next. That's in that head that's swimming around. It's going to be delightful.
Oh goodness, thank you.
One of the things that I did enjoy, I'm not finished the book yet, so I'm partway through because I didn't want to rush it either, because there's all these wonderful exercises. But what I really, last night as I was reading, and you've got the first part, writing down these different emotions and experiences and things. But then when you're in the next part and it says, go back and color them. And I was like, yes, wow, interesting, because I would have interpreted them one way, but then it was like, well, now I have to color them. So what does that mean? And that was a whole other piece of discovery. So I found that interesting because, again, intellectually, you have your one reaction. But then if you let it go of that head and go back to emotion, what does it bring in? Yeah,
it's interesting, actually, because I've talked a lot about people doing that, like you said, a mind map. But last week, I actually did this on a Zoom session with a client. And I did it as a hierarchy chart on PowerPoint. So we set him up with a mind map and we built this mind map through the challenges he's going through, broke them down into different levels. And then from the lower levels, we coloured them in. So everything that he'd got going on in life, we coloured it according to how he felt about it. And then next level up, we looked at the predominant colour and brought that up. And so we built up what his overall emotional state was. And it was really interesting to do that. And I enjoyed doing that with him, to really talk somebody through that process and to be able to do that online. But it can just as easily do it on pen and, with pencil and paper. But so the mind map is a really traditional tool and a great way of getting things out of your head. So although I've not created the concept of doing that, but to then look at that mind map, like you say, and use this strategy to pick out every individual thing. And a few years ago, I did this with a client, because although I started this business, I originally started about 4 years ago before I had some personal challenges and I had to put it all aside for a few years. But I sat down with a lady one day and I did it in a slightly different way, but I did this in that listened to her talk for about 20 minutes, and I was writing down all the key words, the emotions and feelings she was having, and things she talked about and how she was relating to them. And I did it slightly differently, as I then looked at all of the words and I had a blank version of the diagram. And what I did, so if anybody sees on video, I looked at each word and put a dot onto the diagram according to where that word or that emotion or that person or challenge sat. And it was interesting at the time I charted out her story, everything she talked about in her whole life, at how she was all entirely in the black and blue. I keep turning my diagram. So everything she talked about was in the black and the blue, that way. So anybody listening on audio, I'm trying to point to something for Michelle, and it's on video on Zoom, and everything's back to front, and I'm getting in a muddle. So I was able to like literally take an uncoloured version of my diagram and plot out where her emotional profile was, and then where I'd put all the dots onto the diagram for how each thing sat emotionally, and then circled around them. Literally her whole emotional profile was black and blue, and it matched how she was at that time. And it was really, really bad for her. She was in a very, very, very difficult state, and she did end up having to go into hospital for support. But it was just really powerful to be able to do that and see how, from my point of view, although it was a case that was beyond me being able to help her. Mm-hmm. It was interesting from my point of view to be able to have actually sat and worked with that lady. And I can guarantee you that coming away, I had to, I've never been much of a spiritual person, but I could understand why people come away and cleanse their energy, because I felt like I needed to do that, having sat in her energy for an hour. Well, actually about 2 hours I sat with her, and I did that over sort of six sessions. And to sit in her in that level of energy over time is really, really draining, and you have to come away and almost rebalance yourself. But then I've done the same with somebody else, and they're very much up on the yellow profile, or somebody else is more on the angry or the sad. But ideally we want this sort of real blend of, you've got happiness in there. A perfectly balanced emotional cycle should be more at the top of this diagram. You've got happiness. You should have a bit of blue in there, a little bit of blue, because we need to be thoughtful and calm. There should be a little bit of red in there because we need to take some action and be motivated. And we should have a little bit of the internal orange, which is self-care. You don't want to be too low in that orange, because that's like negative self-thoughts. We want the top half of the orange in a circle. And then we need to embrace a bit of care for the outside world and have a purpose and a value. So we want to embrace some of that external orange. So if you always imagine taking this what I've already got as a wheel of a diagram, and then putting a halo around the top half of it, that would be the perfect way to be utilizing emotional cycle. Mm-hmm. But you imagine then taking this halo and it's slipped. So if it's either slipped one way or slipped the other way, I can't do it again. So, or it's sunk to the bottom of the diagram. So you're like taking this elliptical halo and sit that somewhere over that diagram in whatever shape it sits. That's when we talk about our halo slipped and somebody and we talk about this in real life, but it fits with the diagram again. Mm-hmm. And the perfect angelic person who's got life perfect, they've got this little golden halo on, and somebody who's living a life down there with the devil, and as they say, or somebody whose life's completely demonic or whatever they talk about, and these living in all these other colors but in a real deep state. We say it's like the halo slipped, and again it just fits with this diagram. And I just love bringing all those analogies in. Mm-hmm. and realize that it's not that I've created something new. I'm just bringing awareness to what's already there, and how we use it as a society, as a world. It's
beautiful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wow, what a web we've weaved today.
Yeah.
It's so delightful, and the perspective is just so refreshing. And I know, as you and I have talked about, you didn't go to get educated to do this kind of work, and you've found it from the grassroots, and you found it in a way that makes sense for well, it made sense for your son, but also for people who just don't know how to navigate emotion. And, for the academics that spend, years studying emotion, you
Sorry.
kind of you get
Yeah.
lost in that aspect of it sometimes, which takes you out of the grassroots. And sometimes it takes going back to that grassroots to really find that right piece. And that's what I love about it is it just makes so much sense when you take all that other stuff off and you just come back to its most basic component. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's actually been quite a battle in my mind the last few years about doing this. Because I've had people say to me, well, what makes you think you can go and help people? You're not qualified, you've never studied anything, you're not a counsellor, you're not a doctor, blah, blah. I've had all the negative challenges thrown at me.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer is always the same. I didn't need to be any of those to help my son.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that is why I actually don't want to go and get the qualifications now. Not because I don't want to learn, I don't want to study. I'd still love to do the philosophy in a way. But I've said I didn't need to go and become a psychologist or a doctor. And this is not being against anybody who is, because it's so important and they're still needed for lots of right reasons they're needed. I said, but from my point of view, I was a mum who needed to help my son. And I want to stay with that point of view because there's plenty of other parents out there who can help theirs. And it's actually very interesting. And I'm very sensitive how I say this, because obviously connected with you, as you said at the beginning, through the Choose Love movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when I spoke to you and I spoke with Mary France and I spoke with, oh my goodness, my head.
Scarlett. You talked with Scarlett Lewis?
No, it wasn't Scarlett. Shannon.
Oh, with Shannon.
Yeah, I spoke with Shannon. Yes. And I spoke with them and I showed them a quilt that my mum made, was about 25 years ago. And my mum made a quilt that was actually in memory of a school shooting further up in England. It was in Scotland. And I can't remember whether I showed you or not this quilt.
No, I didn't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll have to show you that another time. It's in the cupboard. But it was a quilt that was in memory of the children who were shot in a school in Scotland. So although we didn't know them and it's miles and miles away, it was just something that we understood the impact of it in the media and across the UK at the time. And my daughter was only about a year different from the age of these children that were shot. And because obviously in England we've got much stricter gun laws, and we don't have guns in public in general. It's usually either they're military owned or police owned, or farming have got like the air rifles. But beyond that, we don't walk out in fear of guns everywhere. So it was so unusual in the UK to have a school shooting. But obviously being aware with the Choose Love movement being built on the back of that. But it was so interesting that the other day I did actually watch a programme which was done from the other angle, and it was called Raising School Shooters. And it was done from sort of compassionate point of view of the parents of those children. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting that one of the mums had said she remembered her son acting up one day. He was really angry about something. He was pushing his luck. And she said, I remember pinning him up against the fridge and telling him, you've got to sort your life out. You've got to learn right from wrong, blah, blah, blah. And she was like really having a go at him for being out of sorts. And there she is now, knowing her son's in prison, or I didn't actually catch the beginning of the documentary, but, she's sort of 16, no, it was how many years it was later, about 16 years later. She said she still remembers clearly that day, and now says, how different would it have been if instead of having a go at him, I'd have just hugged him and asked him what's going on in his life. Mm-hmm. And again, with the Choose Love movement and about that compassion. And, it's easy to feel angry about families where the schools have had shootings, but at the same time, no parent raises their child with the intention of doing that. Mm-hmm. And no parent knows which one it's going to be. And yet there are lots and lots of things we can do to avoid things like that. And, you still don't know what your child is going to do at the end of the day. But the one thing that's been mutual, I think, with all of them was that their children were bullied and they weren't listened to. Their children were going through challenges. And the things that they were saying that their children had been through in school was horrendous. Yes. And the other thing that really bugs me, I've got real bugbear about this, is the things they say are done to children are bullying, and it's dismissed, very much like my son was suicidal and the teachers dismissed it. And little children can say things like we just saying with my granddaughter, and it's easy to overlook them as they're saying strange things. If adults did that to each other, we'd be on the phone to the police or a lawyer. They'd be suing each other, they'd be arresting each other. But because they're at school, there seems to be no judicial system for children who are being bullied to extreme levels at school. Exactly. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. But also, like you said, listening to them and finding out what they're going through. And if a child is really severely being bullied at school, there are changes that can be made, not just talking to teachers. I home educated my child, and I don't want to recommend that for everybody because it's hard work. But at the same time, if it was a choice between my child being home educated or being bullied in school, which he was, I am aware that how close my son was to being in that mental state where that could easily have been him doing that in return. I know how he felt about school, how traumatized he was by school. And, I know how angry he was even as a teenager. In his late teens, I know how angry he still was about things that happened to him when he was 7, 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
And those things don't go away. They don't, not easily. He's okay now. And he now realizes it's made him who he is, and he's learned to just embrace what happened to make him stronger now. But, you can't guarantee that 10 years down the line, if somebody's going through a bad mental state again and they're really angry and something triggers it off, you don't know. But for parents, there are changes can be made. They can change schools. They can change class. They can have more conversations. Parents can change how they approach the school. There are so many changes out that can be made, but please don't let children keep suffering. That's my key thing, is I want to bring parents and their teenagers closer together again, get them talking, get those conversations open. And to me, that's the most vital part, because if we can resolve that bit between the parents and teenagers, the rest will be a lot easier.
I think that's a great place for us to close for today. I know there's another conversation in there somewhere, and look forward to when that happens. And I know too, even with the work that we do with Choose Love, that that we'll be crossing the paths in different ways, which will be exciting. I do like to close off with a little bit about dancing, and I think you just said something beautiful in that you were commenting about being able to bring parents back into the kids. We've talked about grandparents being able to come together with kids. One of the things we've been missing here because of the pandemic is we typically would have been dancing together, all the generations, in square dances that happen almost daily here, actually, in the summertime on a typical year. So we've been missing that a little bit. But I would say that my suggestion for people, if they're thinking about how they might want to dive into a conversation with their kids, would be to join hands, make a circle in the kitchen, and start jigging feet to whatever tune is, one you want to put out on the music, and just be able to celebrate together. But that joining of hands and that ability just to move the body together is a great way to open conversation. Is there something you'd like to add?
No, it's amazing, actually. Because I know you did say to me beforehand about dances, and I thought, you know what? I thought a great one to use as an analogy would be the grapevine. When you sidestep, and sometimes life does knock us sideways, and you feel like you're getting your feet in a muddle, and you got to step forwards, backwards, sideways, left foot over right. You get them, but you know what? When you got the right strategy for doing it, you can turn anything into a graceful move and stay in control.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love working with the grapevine when I'm doing my tap and tea on Tuesdays when I teach that class. Yeah, grapevine is always in there. So, okay, thank you so much for your honesty and for your willingness to share such a vulnerable story. And I love what you're doing, and I'm really excited to see where your part 2 takes you. And thank you so much for being a part of the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me today. Thank you.
You are listening to Be Well with Michelle Greenwell. And we hope that some of the tips and tools that you've heard today will be something you'll be able to take forward. And Kay, can you just tell them your website too so they can find you?
Oh, good point. It's kayreeve.co.uk. So it's www.kayreeve.co.uk. Thank you.
Perfect. And the name of your book again?
Oh, that is Brain Unchained. So,
perfect. So you can find that easily, and lots of resources on your website as well, which is great.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you, listeners. Take care.
Thank you.